In the early regal period, Rome stayed small and close to the river. People settled where the Tiber helped them cross, trade, and water animals. The town grew as clusters of huts appeared on nearby hills, not in one planned block, but in pockets of families who trusted each other. Kinship mattered first. If you needed help, protection, or a place to sleep, you turned to your clan. Those clans did not live in isolation for long. The river brought strangers, and strangers brought problems, stolen livestock, disputed boundaries, sudden fights. So the community began to rely on shared rules and shared meeting points. Paths between hilltops turned into regular routes. A few open spaces started to matter because everyone recognized them. Here, disputes settled. Here, news spread. Here, leaders gained authority by keeping peace. That was the quiet change that made a town into something more. When people gathered beyond their own relatives, daily life shifted. Work no longer ended at the hut door. It spilled into the common ground, exchanging goods, arranging marriages, agreeing on defences, marking sacred days together. Each shared space pulled the settlements tighter. Rome still looked like scattered huts, but it began to behave like one community. In the late regal era, Rome stopped feeling like a loose cluster of families and started acting like a city that could command people and reshape land. Kings and leading households pushed projects that no single clan could finish alone. The low ground that once stayed muddy turned into a problem with a solution: drainage. Ditches and channels redirected water, opened space, and made movement more predictable. It sounded practical, but it also announced power. As the ground dried, builders set permanent markers of authority. Temples rose where vows, offerings, and public promises gathered under one roof, tying the city's gods to the city's rulers. Nearby, early open meeting and trading areas formed the habit of coming to a shared centre. That changed routines fast. People brought goods to exchange on set days. News travelled with the crowds. A place to buy and sell became a place to be seen and judged. None of it happened for free. Large building demanded labour, and the burden fell on ordinary residents through enforced work and organised duties. Time that once went to fields and animals got pulled into hauling, digging and shaping stone. Festivals and public rites tightened the schedule even more, drawing people in when the rulers wanted unity on display. Rome grew louder and more ordered at the same time. The city's monuments started managing the city's people. The kings fell, and Rome's government did not simply become freer overnight. It became shared, argued over, and watched closely. Each year, new top officials took charge, and in theory, the community stood above any one man. But in practice, the old noble families, the patricians, held the levers, religious offices, courts, and the right to lead. Ordinary Romans, the plebeians, still paid taxes, served in war, and obeyed orders. That imbalance hit daily life fast. A small farmer called up for campaign still had to keep his land working, and if he fell behind, debt followed. Debt could mean losing property, even losing freedom. The law itself felt like a weapon because it was controlled and remembered by elites who decided what counted as custom. Plebeians did not just resent hardship, they resented uncertainty. If rules were invisible, justice depended on who you knew. So politics moved out of private networks and into public pressure. Plebeians organised, refused cooperation, and demanded protection inside the state they were expected to defend. Step by step, new offices emerged to speak for them and block abuse, and assemblies became places where numbers mattered. The Republic's promise began to sound real, but it came with tension baked in. Rome learned citizen politics through conflict, and ordinary people felt it in court, in service, and at the vote. Rome's armies returned from campaigns with wagons of captured wealth. Gold, silver, and artwork poured into the city, and it did not stay locked away. It funded temples, paid soldiers, and raised expectations. But the biggest change arrived on foot and in chains. Thousands of enslaved people entered Rome at once, alongside merchants who followed the money and migrants who followed the jobs. Work changed fast. Enslaved labour spread through building sites, farms, workshops, and wealthy households, pushing down the value of free labour in many trades. At the same time, new business opened around the flow of conquest: money lending, shipping deals, contract work, and markets for everything captured or imported. Rome did not just win battles, it turned victory into an economy. The city struggled to hold its own success. More people meant more pressure on space, so housing rose higher and packed tighter, with families renting small rooms close to work and crowds. Streets carried constant movement: porters, carts, customers, and newcomers looking for a foothold. Daily life felt louder and more competitive. Rome grew richer, and it also grew harder to navigate. In the late Republic, Rome's population swelled faster than its systems kept up. The city looked richer, but many residents lived on a thin margin. When grain shipments ran late, hunger arrived quickly and anger followed. Food had to cross seas and politics to reach a bowl. A shortage did not just mean empty stomachs. It meant crowds, panic buying, and a capital that felt one bad week away from disorder. In that pressure, mass politics took shape on the streets. Powerful men built followings through patronage, handing out favors, protection, and sometimes food in exchange for loyalty. For ordinary Romans, survival often depended on knowing who could help and who could hurt. Votes in the assemblies mattered, but so did bodies in a crowd. Public life turned competitive and personal. The city's wealth concentrated, and dependence spread outward like a web. Soon, persuasion did not feel enough. Rival networks brought hired muscle, gangs, and intimidation into civic life. Meetings that sounded legal on paper ended under threats, stone-throwing, and brawls. A resident could wake up to normal business and end the day trapped behind a sudden riot. Each clash taught the same lesson: order relied on force as much as tradition. Rome stayed the center of power, but it also became a place where power fought in public. Augustus took power after years of street violence and civil war, and he sold Romans a simple promise: order. He kept old republican titles, but the city felt a new kind of control. Decisions now ran through the emperor's household and his officials. Money, permits, and favors followed clearer channels. For ordinary residents, politics mattered less day to day, and stability mattered more. That stability came with a system. Rome gained organized policing, not as a local habit, but as an imperial service. Watch patrols walked at night, and other units fought fires before they swallowed whole blocks. Streets and neighborhoods stopped relying only on patrons and mobs for protection. Public works also became a tool of government, with repairs and new building tied to authority. Then came the trade-off that defined the early empire: bread and circuses. Grain distribution steadied the city's stomach, and huge games filled its calendar. Leisure no longer felt like a private luxury or a political weapon. It became a managed release valve. Crowds gathered for races and spectacles, and the state measured success by applause as much as by peace. In the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, Rome's size demanded more than laws and armies. It demanded water. Aqueducts carried steady flows from distant hills, and that changed the rhythm of a day. Public fountains became the practical lifeline because most homes still lacked their own taps. Water arrived, but it arrived unevenly. Some districts received strong pressure and clean flow. Others waited, carried, rationed and worried when channels broke. That water fed the great baths, and the baths became more than washing. They served as the city's daily reset: sweat, scrape, soak, then return to work and crowds. But cleanliness stayed complicated. Sewers existed, and the main lines carried waste away. Yet many streets relied on pits, buckets and hurried dumping. The system worked best where power and money kept it repaired. Elsewhere, smell and sickness followed neglect, and everyone understood the difference. Most Romans lived not in villas, but in insulae, tall apartment blocks packed tight for profit. Height meant danger. Stairs meant water had to be hauled upward, so the poorest lived highest, farthest from street fountains, closest to heat and wind. Cooking fires, oil lamps, and careless storage turned a single spark into a neighborhood emergency. Regulations existed, but crowds moved faster than enforcement. Infrastructure reached its peak, and daily life still felt fragile. In the 3rd century, life in Rome stopped feeling predictable. Emperors rose and fell fast, and each change shook confidence in the future. Money lost its meaning as prices climbed and wages failed to keep up. A coin that bought bread one week bought less the next. Families who depended on steady pay from workshops, building jobs, or city services found work interrupted, delayed, or simply gone. Then disease tightened the pressure. Waves of sickness cut through households and work crews, and markets felt the loss immediately. Fewer hands meant fewer goods moved, fewer repairs completed, fewer carts arriving on time. Food prices jumped again, not because Romans suddenly ate more, but because supply broke down. People adjusted by substituting cheaper staples, stretching rations, and relying more heavily on whatever state distributions still functioned. Political upheaval turned economic trouble into street-level anxiety. Rumors traveled faster than official orders, and every new crisis raised the same question: would tomorrow be calmer or worse? Shopkeepers hesitated to stock up, workers hesitated to spend, and creditors demanded harsher terms. The mood shifted from pride to caution. Rome still looked like the capital, but daily life felt like it balanced on a thin edge. In the 4th century, Rome stayed famous, but it stopped being the place where decisions always happened. Emperors spent more time near the frontiers and in newer capitals, and the old city lived on memory and ceremony. At the same time, Christianity moved from tolerated to powerful. Bishops gained influence, and new churches rose as public life shifted away from traditional temples and toward Christian rituals that now shaped the calendar. That change redirected money and loyalty. Aristocrats still had wealth, but their patronage no longer flowed automatically into old civic projects. Some families funded basilicas, charitable distributions, and clergy, while older forms of giving, baths, games, and constant building repairs lost priority. The Senate remained, but it carried less weight without an emperor nearby. Power travelled through court officials and church leaders, and the city adjusted to being important without being central. As the 5th century advanced, the consequences became harder to ignore. With fewer imperial salaries and fewer residents, whole systems struggled. Water lines received less maintenance, public services shrank, and streets that once demanded constant oversight became easier to neglect. The population contracted, not in one dramatic moment, but through slow erosion. People leaving, resources thinning, obligations failing. Rome endured, but it did so as a smaller city, held together by its churches and its past. Rome ended up as two cities in the same place. Streets, sewers and foundations from the ancient capital stayed under newer roads and buildings, and everyday life went on above them. Modern Rome worked, commuted, argued, and expanded while its oldest layers stayed trapped below the surface. That tension shaped everything. Every repair, every subway tunnel, every new construction project forced a choice between speed and preservation. Tourism turned that buried past into a powerful economy. Visitors followed routes through the Forum, the Colosseum, and the Great Baths, and the city adapted around them with tickets, barriers, and timed entry. But archaeology did not move at tourist speed. Digs slowed traffic, delayed development, and sometimes stopped it entirely. Each discovery created new questions about what belonged to scholars, what belonged to residents, and what could be sold as an experience. Meanwhile, ordinary Romans lived with the consequences in small, practical ways. Neighborhoods grew expensive near famous ruins, while other areas carried the burden of crowding and commuting. Politics still flared around land, money, and public space, just with different tools and louder microphones. The ancient capital once felt precarious, packed and contested, and modern Rome still carried that pattern, only now a living city stood directly on top of it.